My name is Jason Cassidy, and I'm the CEO of Shinydocs Corporation, and I'm joined today by Cheryl McKinnon, the Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. We became a client of Forrester a little while ago, and we've had a really great relationship with them, and they've helped us craft our narrative around the product and around our understanding of the market. We're going to cover some of the things that Shinydocs is doing today, but in the same time, we want to talk about the market as a whole and some of the areas for improvement in the areas of enterprise content management, cloud, and AI. The theme is beyond the hype, because what we want to talk about today is specifically things that you can do right now. I will introduce Cheryl and let her give a quick background.
Great. Thanks, Jason. And my name is Cheryl McKinnon. I've been with Forrester for just over 5 years, covering a pretty broad swath of the content management market. So ECM, the transition to content platforms and content services, file sync and share, and a lot of the tools and utilities that help with migration as well.
The first thing that we want to draw attention to is organizations are quickly realizing that they need to manage all of their data. And when we talk about all of their data, we mean all of their data across file shares, email, and all the other content sources. Cheryl, if you could talk about why is this becoming a priority and what are the driving factors?
It's interesting because when we talk about content management systems, it's all about the value of metadata, policies, easy search, and the ability for users to get their work done. But there's so much content that sits outside of our neat and tidy content management repositories that this has really been rising in importance as a major pain point for large organizations. Organizations are holding dozens, if not even hundreds of terabytes of unstructured data, aka files and documents in many different forms. In fact, the data that we have is that 61% of our technology decision makers reported having over 100 terabytes when we last surveyed them in 2017. And that was a big jump up from the 30% who said they had over 100 terabytes in 2016. Organizations are becoming much more aware of just how much information they're holding, not necessarily that the data stores have doubled in just a year. It's like people are organizing and trying to do an inventory and trying to understand exactly what they have. The proliferation of file shares out there or unmanaged SharePoint sites, this continues to persist as a top problem for people responsible for managing their enterprise content. We do some annual surveys every year talking to the ECM decision makers, and this sprawl of untapped or unorganized file shares and other sites came up as one of the top challenges facing their programs. And we're going to continue to see this become even a little bit more fragmented. The shift to cloud services for content management and collaboration and storage continues to pick up speed, often prompted by the move to kind of all-encompassing Office productivity suite. So we're going to continue to see the shift from on-premises storage locations and applications to cloud continue to pick up steam. If we take a look at all these sprawling shared drives, again, into the dozens or even hundreds of terabytes, organizations, especially in regulated industries or that work with customers, there's a risk that some of this information might be sensitive. There could be proprietary information, there could be personally identifiable information that belongs to their employees or their clients, their partners. And as we see the change in some of the global regulatory frameworks become much more rigid around handling and securing and protecting personal information, organizations realize, okay, we need to take action. There's been a lot of interest in the customers I've been talking to over the last year or so, trying to prepare for some of these changing data privacy laws, specifically GDPR with respect to European citizens' data and people doing business with European citizens. So trying to understand, what do they have? Is there anything sensitive there? And do we need to take action? Some of you may be familiar with the term rot, the redundant, the obsolete, the trivial or transitory content out there. One of the really interesting use cases is preparing for something like a migration. We may have 50 copies of the same PowerPoint deck sitting out there on our various network drives. Everybody downloaded it when they got it as an email attachment. This kind of redundant, duplicate information often causes confusion. Users are coming up with invalid search results, or they're looking at old versions of documents that might steer them in the wrong direction. As part of this overall cleanup, not only to meet some of the emerging data protection laws or to get back in compliance with things like their regular records retention schedules, they're trying to clean up some of these network drives just from a personal productivity point of view and to reduce some of the pain points that their end users are faced with.
Yeah, that makes sense, Cheryl. And it's a pretty broad problem statement when we start talking about all these fragmented places and new places where people can start putting the information. Earlier, you alluded to some statistics about the growth associated with data size. I'm hoping that you could talk about the typical data volumes that you're finding now with organizations.
So this particular data set comes from decision makers for data management and analytics. And so we asked the question, how much unstructured data, meaning content, documents, and files, is currently stored within your company? If we add that up, it comes out to just over 60% that has 100 terabytes or more, including that 12% that has over 5 petabytes. We're seeing the scale of unstructured information certainly get into some very high volumes.
Yeah, and earlier you alluded to the fact that it seems like these numbers have dramatically increased since your last surveys, and that's not attributed to the data growth. Is it because people are just finding more data because of these regulations?
That's my interpretation of the data. Again, if we went back to 2016, we saw just about 30% or so said that they had over 100 terabytes. In the customer conversations I've had over the last 12 to 18 months, there certainly has been a lot of interest in trying to get their arms around exactly what do they own. Organizations, especially in large global businesses, often grow through merger and acquisition, so they're inheriting years of stored documents and files. There might be network drives that they hadn't looked at first that perhaps now they're starting to inventory. So I think there's been a lot of awareness over the last 12 to 18 months to kind of explain that jump in the numbers.
Yeah, and certainly our engagement with customers has been consistent with that. Quite often when we first engage, we'll talk to them and they won't really know exactly how much data they have. They'll know how much is sitting right in front of them in their current project. But when it comes to finding all the rest of the file shares, finding all the rest of the email, finding all the rest of the desktop information, it takes something like GDPR to really help them have a motivation to go and suss out where all the rest of the data is. How does Forrester view the wider adoption of new technology? Specifically of interest to us is cloud and machine learning. And what impact is it having on the industry and going to have on the industry?
If we're thinking about the market that we've called file analytics, so some of the tools that are out there able to identify, analyze, make sense of this unstructured data sitting out there on our network drives, often as preparation for something like a migration or automated categorization type of effort, we are seeing that the rules are changing. The complexity level is beginning to grow. We're certainly moving from a world where we're just storing simple Office documents or maybe legacy scanned images into a world where, we're starting to see rich media become more and more of a vehicle for corporate communication or education. As this market evolves, the vendors will need to keep pace in terms of being able to analyze content and the meaning of things like video, audio, other forms of, digital imagery. Do you need to detect whole cache of scanned driver's licenses sitting in someone's network directory if they're all in JPEG format? I think as we start using rich media much more widely for various business communication purposes and use our digital cameras to capture photographs of potentially sensitive information or proprietary information, the vendors are going to have to keep pace. When we're talking into the terabyte scale, automation at every level is going to be a key requirement. We're seeing a lot of investment in terms of embedding machine learning capabilities, some of these cognitive intelligence services, moving into the direction of AI so that we can start to categorize or tag information at scale, especially have the ability to train it against a managed repository system with a good solid metadata or information architecture. I think we're going to continue to see evolution in this space as the content types get more varied and rich. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, cloud continues to come into the mix. We're seeing more and more efforts here in terms of identifying information as part of an intelligent migration. Let's move the stuff that's useful, the stuff that we know is going to keep our users productive, and perhaps it's time to retire or archive or even dispose of some of that older information based on our policies. And we do see a lot of organizations need to revisit some of their policies and their approaches to retaining information, to securing information, and ultimately even securely destroying the information after a particular period of time. Many of the organizations I talk to, global companies or companies that are doing business in Europe, are very much aware of some of the new requirements for GDPR. And so this has compelled some awareness in the market that we do need to understand, are we holding confidential data that belongs to either our clients, our partners, or even our employees? Think about ways of protecting it, identifying it, so I can move it to a secure location or make sure the right security controls are there, understand who might be inadvertently given access to it. And as mentioned earlier, we do see that organizations are sitting on top of often anywhere between 30 and even 50%, sometimes more, of just pure duplicate information, what we called rot a moment ago. I think there's also some really interesting opportunities as organizations look to get much more data-driven in terms of their decisions. They're looking to extract insights out of some of the data and the content that they have. They want to make better decisions about how they run their internal operations or how they serve customers. There's an awful lot of data that just lies simply unused or untapped in a lot of these documents sitting out on our network drives. I tend to think of these as being dumb document formats. Maybe we've gone from paper to digital, but if we've not turned that particular document into data that can be used, that can be searched, that can be extracted, that we can bring that data into being a full participant in some kind of other analytics initiative, then we really haven't done much in terms of moving from paper to digital. So I think we need to take that extra step of not just being digital, but also extracting some of the useful, meaningful data locked up in those otherwise dumb document formats.
That really resonates with me when you talk about dumb document formats. I quite often will encounter customers that have TIFF files or scanned images into PDF of documents that have never been OCR'd. They have such data volumes that you couldn't have people go through these. So that's why we're looking to use machine learning. First, we OCR the document, then use the machine learning against the documents to actually activate them, convert them from being dumb into something that is actually useful for you. And I really like that terminology of the dumb document. And that leads us into more depth about talking about file analytics and the impact it's projected to have on the industry.
This has been a really interesting kind of emerging market. Vendors coming from a variety of different heritages, but the use cases, I think, are becoming more and more clear as I talk to clients and look at what kind of content challenges they're faced with. The first is the fact that many organizations are looking at some form of modernization of their internal architecture, and that might mean moving to cloud services for content or data storage. It might mean modernizing, moving from an older enterprise content management system to more modern content platform that might be cloud or on-premises. And so that preparation for what I would consider an intelligent migration is a really important use case. And that goes back to not just moving, doing a lift and shift from an old system to a new system or from an on-prem system to a cloud system, but trying to get into the heart of what that document represents. Why is it useful to keep or retain? Being able to extract some of that useful metadata and understand, okay, is this a contract? Is this a resume? Is this an employee file? Is this a legal document? Being able to pull out, useful metadata that might help down the road as a tag or a categorization tool for the document when it gets into the content application, or being able to understand, from improving things like search and analytics. Okay, this pertains to customer 1, 2, 3, and I've got a whole group of these things. So extracting that from the body of the document, or perhaps from some of the file properties associated with it, and being able to use that metadata for a whole range of use cases, whether it's to automate things like application of policies, whether it's just to improve usability around things like search or sorting, or even to establish things like kick off a workflow or a process based on critical metadata fields. So a lot of really interesting opportunities there, both in terms of migration and using it once it's migrated to the modern platform. We've talked a bit about reduction already, so being able to understand, hey, I've got 50 versions of that PowerPoint. Let's get rid of the 45 that aren't related to a particular other application or aren't in use for a particular purpose. And then, of course, looking at the technologies that can also help us identify any kind of sensitive information that might be sitting and locked up in a particular document. Make sure that they are documents that are then either secured, protected, or migrated to a secure location so that we don't have this PII floating around where people can look at it without authorization, or make sure it's not in a location that can be easily leaked or hacked or breached. The whole area around metadata extraction and enrichment, we talked a little bit about the importance of that in the context of migration. But there's also a lot of interesting opportunities even just to enrich that metadata. Can I pull out concepts or themes or ideas that resides in the document itself, build up more of a taxonomy or contribute to a thesaurus? When I get into the usability issues, that document can be exposed or discovered by the user in a broader range of techniques. And then, of course, we do see that some organizations may not need to migrate everything into a managed repository system. There is an increased interest among some customers to apply various policies right in place. So maybe I want to clean up my network drive, continue to use it, but I want to monitor it so that as information ages out, it reaches its retention policy. Maybe I can actually apply some rules and monitor things so that I can take action on it when it hits that expiration date right on the network drive itself. When we took a look at some of the core capabilities of this market that we call file analytics, these are some of the things that we thought were most important when customers are looking at particular tools or vendors. And the ability to analyze a file, so understand what it is, the type, the location, the age, what kind of security access controls surround it in terms of where it's stored. The ability then to take action on it, so to remediate it, meaning let's move it, migrate it, dispose of it, secure it if we need to. I think usability is really important when we start thinking about some of the tools in this market. Increasingly, what I'm hearing from some of the customers I talk to is they may have a centralized IT team or perhaps a security team that's responsible for this migration or cleanup or PII detection initiative, but ultimately they know that it's the line of business that actually owns the documents, owns this data. And so they need to have tools that are user-friendly enough, simple dashboards that are clear so that users or the information stewards embedded in those lines of businesses can help make decisions about what to act on and what to keep. Increasingly, we see tools that need to appeal to a broader audience, not just technical users necessarily. We're seeing increasing interest in making sure that the files have the appropriate security controls and ongoing governance around them, understanding is this sensitive information sitting in a network location that's perhaps too wide open, maybe the everybody group has access, so let's make sure that we can remediate that and close things down and secure things appropriately. And then, of course, as organizations go through their own modernization efforts, we need to think about the kinds of tools that are going to best fit our particular environment. What are the tools that let us work in, for many firms, will be an ongoing kind of heterogeneous, mixed bag, hybrid world of content management systems and both on-premise and cloud-based storage systems. What's the right flexible approach there?
That's certainly consistent with what we've seen with the market and what people are looking for. It is the line of businesses now that are driving this behavior. And it's a neat adaptation, too, when we're talking to information technology professionals, because they're so used to the super user approach, and being able to start addressing usability from a line of business perspective is certainly something that we like to promote. And it's a good segue, actually, into 20 years ago, it myself included, people started working on enterprise content management. And it was intended to be a solution to the problems that we've described so far in the first half of this call. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what happened.
Yeah, really good question. I think I've been around for more than 20 years at this point, but it's an interesting market. I mean, there's been a lot of successes in the market, but also some failures and missteps along the way as well. If I take a step back and look at the bigger picture market, it's a pretty healthy outlook. I mean, the volume of enterprise content that needs to be managed and controlled and shared and kept, that volume is not decreasing in any way. But the scale, the complexity adds some new wrinkles to what's been sometimes some challenging deployments. Good news is that we see almost 90%, in fact 87% of current ECM program leaders intend to continue to expand their deployments. So they're rolling out new applications, reaching out to new teams, continuing their progress. So that's a healthy signal. The top drivers that we see in terms of why people are making these investments and continuing these rollouts are really interesting. In our latest survey, digitization of business process was actually the #1 driver for deploying content management technologies, recognizing that there's still opportunity to eliminate paper-based or other kind of manual processes in terms of how we create and share and distribute our corporate content. Still a lot of opportunities there for automation and for streamlining the way that we create and share information. And in fact, better content sharing comes up as the close #2 requirement for content management deployment. So the ability not only to find things effectively and accurately, but then make sure I can share it with my team, my department, and in some cases even externally to what I often call the extended enterprise, those trusted partners who are our clients or suppliers. That's a requirement as well. The interesting thing here is that, while we've had a lot of deployment success and a lot of interest in continuing to move forward with deployments, user adoption has actually popped back up to the top of the top challenges list. So we ask this question year over year as well, and often we hear challenges around things like file share sprawl, or challenges around struggle to get key stakeholders aligned on things like governance. But for 2017, the top challenge was back to user adoption. I think if we take a look at a lot of the deployments out there, realistically, a lot of the on-premises systems, and that is still a very predominant deployment model for enterprise content management applications, it's often hard to keep those on-prem complex systems upgraded, keep them current. And so even if vendors have been innovating in terms of their usability or mobile apps or user interfaces, sometimes customers struggle to keep pace. And so they're stuck with kind of older, more clunky look and feel with their product. And that's where user adoption starts to struggle. But it's also interesting that over half, in this case 56% of the teams that we surveyed, are actually rethinking their business case for ECM. And in some cases, it doesn't necessarily mean they're switching products, but it means that they're looking at new goals and objectives, new outcomes that they want to get out of their deployments. And the top new outcomes that people are thinking about are better knowledge sharing, about improving customer experience, and then, of course, not surprisingly, improving their compliance profiles.
Certainly that sets it up on a tee for the next part of what we're going to discuss as we get more specific into the machine learning areas, some of the usability areas for ECM, and that kind of takes us back to our title of Beyond the Hype. So let's get more specific. We really want to talk about machine learning and how it's going to be a critical component of ECM in the future and any content management in the future. What can we expect?
There's been a ton of innovation going on across many of the vendors, both old vendors and new vendors in this space. So I think if we look over the next couple of years, I think I've pegged analytics and the infusion of AI and machine learning is probably the most disruptive trend to hit this market in a little while. One of my colleagues wrote a couple of years ago about a report around, sharing your cubicle with robots. And he used the term the cognitive tipping point. And I kind of thought, well, what does that look like in the world of content management? We think of this cognitive tipping point as that inflection point at which cognitive technology transforms a given segment of work by interacting with humans naturally and by turning data into insights and action. So if we think about that in the world of how we manage content, how we organize it, how we work with it, I think there's some really interesting opportunities kind of right on the horizon in terms of how we can use some of these advanced algorithms to automate the categorization and classification of content, to start doing smarter, more relevant contextual recommendations in terms of content that they can surface up to me in my moment of need. The ability to use alternative interfaces, voice commands to extract information, do automated translations. I think there's a whole range of these intelligent cognitive services that are quite rapidly coming into this market. If we think about some of the opportunities that artificial intelligence and the algorithms behind it can bring to the table, the kinds of things that we can do with this that we couldn't necessarily do at scale with just human eyes alone is, can we sense what kind of information is out there, especially when it comes to non-textual data? We've got video, we've got audio, we've got images, we've got photos with faces in it. Can the tools start to recognize the patterns, extract the text so we can engage with a video by understanding the text of the spoken word contained within it? Try to find a particular scene in the middle of a movie that's relevant based on the tags that the system has automatically extracted and applied onto it. A whole new way of engaging and searching for some of this information. Speech analytics, text analytics, even automated translation from one language to another. The ability to extract things like meaning and sentiment from the documents and the other kind of textual assets that we have. I think some really interesting opportunities. Then, of course, the next phase is, what are these algorithms doing? They're learning and they're thinking, understanding how we've organized previous content, recognizing patterns, and being able to automate the categorization of things, in a similar way. And of course, how does that help us act? The ability to engage with content differently, to ask questions in using natural language, and it understands and comprehends alternative language, how we use phrases to express something, but being able to use alternative vocabulary to get the same result. I think some really interesting opportunities, especially if we recognize the scale of digital content is continuing to grow. If we think about these intelligent content services, some of these new opportunities, again, using natural language that will give us some enhanced understanding of the content and allow us to consume things and find things in different ways using different kinds of vocabulary, using the machine learning algorithms to automatically categorize and automate kickoff processes, being able to get that contextual capture and automated categorization at scale. Again, recognizing the signals, what the document is about, where did it come from, who was the author, being able to extract that information and tag it in meaningful ways. And then from a migration perspective, I think some of the more manual or lift and shift kind of efforts around migration and movement of content will disappear in favor of more automated approaches, again, being able to extract some of this meaning in the metadata and do things in a much more automated fashion.
So what strategy should they use to start adding the cognitive capabilities to their ECM programs?
I think there's a few different areas to start. This chart is something that published last year when we were trying to understand, okay, so in this case of file analytics, many of the vendors of which do have machine learning capabilities built in, is where do you kind of decide where to start? And so of some of the more common use cases that I talk to customers about, trying to map them in terms of, well, how complex is the use case and how relevant are they in terms of delivering like tangible business value, and kind of see it on a spectrum from reactive to proactive. The more reactive, in terms of just being very tactical, is something like the file share cleanup, using some of the analytics and algorithms to do things like duplicate detection, or being able to understand, okay, this is a rendition of the Word document in another format. Then we get into a little bit more sophistication around things like, well, sensitive data detection, go out and crawl and process and identify what might be containing things like PII or other kinds of confidential text or data strings. And then even getting into some of the more intelligent use cases. Some of the organizations I've spoken to are going through some substantial business reorganizations. And so they want to be able to use some of these tools to intelligently and accurately parse through, again, these terabytes of documents. Perhaps they're going to spin off a line of business as part of a M&A kind of activity, and being able to find all the documents relevant to the sister company that's now going to be independent. So how do I figure out what belongs to whom? So some really interesting use cases there. From an adoption perspective, when do you expect to adopt some of these more cutting edge areas? And for things like for the file analytics, for things like intelligent migrations, we do see that there's interest in doing that among many firms, in the next year or so. When we get into things like AI, machine learning, other kind of cognitive services, this is where we still see it's another 1 to 2 years out before we start to get really meaningful pilots or phase 1 kind of adoption inside the content management practice team. We do see that is just about 20% plan to do something within 24 months, another 15% or so planning to do something within the next 1 year. So again, that 1 to 2 year horizon is really what we're projecting for things like AI and machine learning really coming into the content management program areas. And I think what's going to be important as we move into that adoption is that, we're not just looking at reinventing the wheel. We're not just repaving the existing path. Is that we are thinking differently, and we're taking a little bit more of an outside-in perspective. Don't just bolt on or automate existing processes, but rethinking things from scratch. In a more traditional business, kind of a, let's say, early stage of maturity, if you think about companies embarking on digital transformation in terms of what that means for them, don't just bolt on a new set of technologies and hope to automate existing approaches. What we need to think of is, can we actually rethink a process and think through, where are there opportunities to cut entire steps or rethink the content creation process really from start to finish. Don't just look at efficiency and cost saving in terms of the outcomes and expectations, but can you actually start to use data and get more nimble and agile? Use some of that information locked up in your documents to make better and more informed decisions. Certainly speed. Organizations that are serious about their own transformation initiatives are looking to become much more agile and nimble in terms of making innovations, testing and innovating, and having the data, having the information from those previously relatively unmanaged locations is certainly could be a very valuable input to that. And of course, in terms of like the value proposition, it's not just about better products or better processes, but it's also enriching kind of that ecosystem with you and your customers, you and your partners, you and the employee experience as well. So for those organizations that are working to bring analytics and some of these automated approaches into their content management systems, again, 48% really aren't doing anything effectively, but those that are, again, are still kind of tapping some of the low-hanging fruit here in terms of some of the nuts and bolts, not necessarily getting very sophisticated, but are looking to automate the categorization of their documents or are looking to extract data from that content using some kind of a data extraction or even optical character recognition types of tools.
This is kind of a good opportunity, too, to kind of say to, let's say, 48% of the organizations out there or people out there responsible for this, it's a little bit of shame on you. As we wade in with our machine learning models to people's data, we identify their documents, we identify entities in the documents, and we provide a lot of value, but it builds on itself. So the machine learning gets better and better and better the more data that it consumes. So if you don't start it right now, you're actually going to be miles behind your competitors who are starting it right now. And that's what, to me, what this slide really calls out is that it's almost 50% of the people out there are going to be way behind just because the machine learning, it grows at such a pace and its understanding grows at such a pace. Going back to kind of where Shinydocs got started, the first thing that we did was really identify that enterprise content management systems are underutilized. And it's nice to see that Forrester's kind of called out adoption as one of the big challenges. The way we've stated the question here is before any program for ECM or otherwise can work, people need to use it. And I'd like you to expand on the challenges and with adoption in the industry.
In our last major survey, this came right back up to the very top of the list in terms of the challenges facing content management programs today. User adoption we saw as a top challenge several years ago, kind of dropped down the list. I think as we saw some innovation happening across the vendors, we saw some modernization activities happening, but now we're getting right back into user adoption as a top challenge. And I think there's still a lot of manual activities that people are expecting their users to do in terms of assigning metadata, tagging things, coming up with naming conventions. I think that there is an opportunity to take some of that burden off the end users as we look at some of the modernization opportunities ahead of us.
Certainly, and that's our experience. Everybody knows that you're supposed to records manage your important information, but nobody really understood the business context around trying to get somebody whose day job it is to not be a records manager to actually take responsibility for that has been difficult. And at Shinydocs, we approach this from a different perspective, is rather than trying to train people on how to use an enterprise content management system better, we inverted the problem. And we said, people are using email, people are using shared drives, and they're using your local drives. And that's kind of where they like to hang out. And if you try to get them to use anything else, then it doesn't matter how cool or modern or pretty you make the interface, people aren't going to use it as much as the place where they feel comfortable. With the Shiny Drive interface, for example, we made people's, as far as they're concerned, it's their shared drive, and it works with every application, and it works just like their desktop does. But it happens to be enterprise content management in the background with the audit histories, with the version history, with classifications and categorization, search, all of that is in place, so the organization is getting what they want, but the end users don't really know that they're using it. And we've had really great success with that. We've been the Open Text Technology Partner of the Year for the last 2 years in a row, nominated again for this year. And this graph here is actually real customer data. This is a customer of 3,500 knowledge workers who deployed the Shiny Drive back in June of 2015, and they realized a 600% increase in utilization practically overnight. And it's not because people liked it better, it's just they couldn't tell the difference between what they like to do on their local desktop and what they're now doing with enterprise content management. And to show what that looks like to the user, and I hope everybody agrees this is kind of a boring part of the demo, but it's important to understand that you can't just force people to learn this new website or learn this new drag and drop tool and make it part of the way they work. No, people like their H drive or their S drive, or they like working in their meta folder. And we just make that back-ended by your enterprise content management system. We make it back-ended by cloud. So you start realizing the benefits of cost savings associated with cloud. You realize the benefits of the enhanced enterprise content management. But from the end user perspective, super simple. Nothing has to change. It's been great success for us. And I will posit that if you use Shiny Drive and you use the technology like that, people are actually willing to use their content management systems. Now that people are willing to use the content management systems, We talk about the cognitive digital transformation that is going to better activate this enterprise content.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing some very clear market movements in terms of the emerging flexible, nimble, intelligent content platforms out there. So we're kind of in that generational shift from the old systems on premises to modern content platforms that might be cloud friendly, if not cloud native. And it's interesting that, as we see this modernization effort move forward, the importance of metadata, the importance of information architecture becomes more and more critical, because as we move from kind of this monolithic stack of ECM suites into much more nimble content platforms, organizations want to be able to deliver those very specific content or even process-centric apps that people need to use, much more granular, much more focused, fewer set of features and capabilities just to get the job done. That means that there's a lot of content that are going to be shifting into these modern content platforms that can play a really important role in more downstream analytics activities. That can be these sources of data for all kinds of interesting applications and these, what my colleagues call the systems of insight. Can I make better, more informed decisions about how I serve my customers, how I serve my internal employees, how improve, my processes around products and services, and being able to tap into a lot of this data that sits locked up in documents.
I really liked when you first showed me this particular graph here. When I talk to my enterprise customers, they're not necessarily worried about Internet of Things or wearables, but you described to me that you have to start thinking in terms of this, of repurposing of data. And the example that you gave, Cheryl, was that 100 megabyte PDF file that contains lots of rich information. It's not going to be consumable by different systems. In wearables and Internet of Things are a good example of those different systems. Even though they aren't specific to maybe my customer, I just like thinking in those terms now that you've brought that to my attention.
This is actually one of the things I think is going to be kind of another really interesting disruptor in the content management space over the next couple of years is customers are really struggling with even just thinking through the whole content creation and distribution and consumption models. If you think about it, we would construct, a 100-page PDF for a big formal technical document manual that we might want to ship with one of our goods or services. But in the consumer world, we might actually want to consume that how-to document, that schematic, through my dashboard kiosk or some other kind of mobile app. Maybe it is going to be through my smart watch, for example. Just give me the instructions on how to fix that blinking light. So I think we are going to see some interesting kind of rethinking of the content creation process. And I think some of the opportunities bringing some of these algorithms, machine learning into the mix is, can we actually start intelligently breaking apart some of our existing content? It's still accurate, still relevant. It's just not constructed in a form or a structure that can be delivered to all of our different preferred consumption channels going forward.
Yeah, it's a powerful way of thinking. I'd like to show how Shinydocs is approaching this problem. And it really starts with the understanding of the data. So this is an actual dashboard of when, for example, we're crawling different file shares and enterprise content management systems and playing back to the users and administrators and managers. This is where your data is temporally by modified date, by create date, and by type. But we extend it a lot deeper. We actually use machine learning libraries to reach into the files and start clustering that information so that you can start seeing, okay, these ones are all non-disclosure agreements. These ones here are all this type of claims form A, claims form B. But what's nice about how we're doing it is we actually let the machine learning libraries learn from the existing body of work. So your enterprise content management system that's out there that may have some documents that are already attributed. So if you already have some attributes on documents, those are actually machine learning training events for our system to say, this is how a document with this content should be attributed. So we learn that, and then when you show us a document we've never seen before, it can accurately say, this thing should be attributed in the following way. It's really quite powerful, and we've got some neat use cases across oil and gas, across financial services, and others. But it all starts with this initial file share or enterprise content management analysis and visualization so that people can start seeing what they have. And this is something that Forrester has helped us kind of articulate the architecture of what's going on. Traditionally, there's always been this concept of data fabric, and that is all of your structured data being combined together into one master data system that you can then interrogate. And what's always been missing is that unstructured data, which happens to be generally 85% or more of your data volume by content. We extend that data fabric to your enterprise content management systems, your email, your shared drives, and we extract that content in meta information into a data catalog. And once we have it, that's where the machine learning can really start churning on the information. We cluster it, we identify the things that are alike, we allow you to attribute that and say, okay, all these documents that seem to be alike, they're actually of this type of document, and they should have this level of security associated with them and have different vectors of classification. All that happens in a machine learning data catalog. It doesn't require anybody to write code or to do anything proprietary. Now, of course, once you have this mind, this big brain associated with your data, that's the data catalog, people need to access it. So there's essentially 4 different things that you can do once you know everything about your data. Insights and discovery is a lovely application. So we have applications so that you can interrogate the information and you can identify patterns within this unstructured data so that you can go and ask, show me all the documents that have PII, show me all the ones that have my name in it specifically, show me all the ones that have organization's name. And it's not concept. It's not just searching for a particular word. It's not searching for Shinydocs. It actually uses the AI to understand concepts, like show me all the ones that mention people's names. Like it's pretty powerful that way. Okay, now I got some machine learning insights. That's cool, but we still need to automate processes. So where a human used to have to go in and make a decision about what type of document it is and where it should be routed can now be automated. And in certain circumstances where humans are still required, we call this augmented, where we make a recommendation. Here's the piece of information that might be relevant to you right now, and then you can take that and then start driving your workflow based upon that augmented information. I think we'll see a lot more augmented over the next couple of years as people begin to start to trust what the relationships are that are going on inside of these data catalogs. And then the other application that's really hasn't happened much until the machines start to understand the data, and that's disposition, is how do you get rid of stuff and feel confident about it? Well, if a machine has gone through and said, this is definitely part of your rot profile, this is definitely redundant, it's definitely obsolete, it's definitely transient, then it allows you to really start identifying disposition schedules. And because we've got classification on documents with great accuracy, you can also do disposition on documents that might have an internal mandate or some type of regulatory mandate that say it must be destroyed after this amount of time. Well, now you can do that at scale because the machines are making the decision as to what information should be destroyed. This is something you can do right now with Shinydocs software. It is something that absolutely everybody on the call should definitely try. Phone us, and my email address will be at the end, and we'll get you going on a proof of concept on this because it's quite powerful. It's unlike anything that you have certainly used before. The thing that I like to draw people's attention to, and why is this different, or what is it doing that makes it different? I want you to ask yourself, why is, when I search Google in the public web, why is it so much better than what's going on inside of my corporate search when I try to search my SharePoint or my other ECM system? Well, it's better because the people at Google are constantly putting the data through different layers of understanding. They know all the text of the content, they do image recognition, they give it additional classifications, like saying this is temporal information, this is information over here is location-based. So that classification helps you build context around the data. It does, of course, entity extraction. It knows people's names, organizations' names, and other important entities. So it can start calling those out as more relevant as part of the data. And then you can start driving decisions based upon that. And this is a continuous process. So this is all built into the Shinydocs platform. And the idea is that you continually enrich your data with this, and you can start driving some better decisions. We don't want to be an enterprise content management system. We don't want to be your ERP system or, say, replace your CRM. We are the piece that understands where all the data is, how it relates to each other, and then you can continue using the system that makes sense for you. This kind of takes me to the next level, and that's enterprise content management systems traditionally will capture what people refer to as the important records. And if you take those organizations that have 5 petabytes of information, it's hard to get all of those important records into a system. So in place is becoming a higher priority. I wonder if you could comment on the importance of in-place, like file share analysis and management.
It's definitely a topic that's rising in interest with customers. And I think because of some of the usability struggles that some organizations have had in terms of ECM, the fact that some organizations are using their content applications for specific use cases like records or specific kind of line of business applications, we do see that there's a lot of information that still sits, whether it's a network drive or a cloud storage space. And so, that information still potentially has value. It still potentially holds risk. And so the ability to wrap it up in some policies to understand, how we keep it for the long term or how we dispose of it when it's no longer useful, I think is absolutely key.
Yeah, and it kind of leads into what Shinydocs is doing here is that, and of course we want to engage people to engage us with proof of concept of this to see how it's different. The file share analysis is an extremely powerful tool that we have in the toolkit, and it allows you to really start thinking about what are you going to do to your data in place as far as managing that information, and what value can you extract out of that in-place information. And then when it comes time for you to say, I want to move a portion of it to the cloud, or I want to move a portion into ECM, now you're in a better place in that it's already pre-classified and it has some of the rot analysis done and removed. So you are in a situation where you can make better informed decisions about this. And that kind of relates to the upfront file share analysis. How does that help the migration?
I think it really helps organizations set their priorities and pick their battles. So if they know what's worth keeping because it's active content, people are retrieving it, they're viewing it, they're copying from it on a regular basis, that's the current active information that should be set as a high priority for migration. Stuff that hasn't been looked at in a number of years, obviously low priority, if not a candidate for potential archiving or disposition. So I think, just getting that insight, that understanding into what's out there certainly help pick your battles, set your priorities, move the content that's most relevant to get your users up and productive in whatever new system they might be adopting.
Yeah, and that's been our experience, is that the best informed customers are the ones that have the best migration strategies. And what I mean by informed are the ones who have done some pre-qualification of the data, some pre-analysis, and some in-place management. And then once they've done that, then that sets themselves up for a really good migration. And that actually brings us to the end of our time. And certainly I want to really take an opportunity here to thank Cheryl McKinnon for joining us today. It's been great working with Forrester, and specifically it's been really great working with you, Cheryl, and it helps us position ourselves much better in the industry. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, all.